My name is Kelly Thompson. I'm the Outreach Director with St. John's Riverkeeper, and I'm here at Earthworks Jax. Been talking about ways to be river friendly in your backyard as we're gearing up for algae bloom season. During the summer months and when we are in our yards planting, you can make a difference so that our water doesn't look like this with toxic green algae, and ways that we cannot feed the algae and making a difference in our backyard. So water flows the path of least resistance. So there's lots of rivers all over the United States, tributary streams that flow north, east, west, south. It's just dependent on where the lower elevation is. So our river flows north because in the mountains of South Florida, it's a mere 27 feet higher than the rest of our watershed. So our river elevation drops only 27 feet over 310 miles. So what does make it really unique is how slow it flows because of that slow drop in elevation. And its nickname is one of the laziest rivers in the world, and that's a huge issue when you have pollution that gets in our river, because sometimes in Lake George, the largest lake in the St. John's, sometimes when pollution is in there, it takes months to get out because it's just stagnant in certain, there's no flow, it's stagnant in certain areas. So a unique attribute of the St. John's River, but also sometimes a huge problem because there is no flow and refresh and recharge. So I just drove back this week. We spent 2 full days on the St. John's River in Middle Basin in Volusia County, and that went right through the Ocala National Forest and Lake Woodruff National Preserve. So both of those are huge areas of land that are protected on the national level. And so that's a huge corridor of our wildlife. Ocala National Forest is the largest national forest east of the Mississippi. Yeah, we have a lot of protected lands in Florida, although we could use more, because when you invest in conservation land, you invest in clean water. And so those large areas of land really help our clean water systems. But you all are here today to learn about algae blooms and pollution problems that are affecting our river, which I would say is the biggest issue affecting the St. John's River is nutrient pollution and pollution overall. So back in the 70s, we would have issues of industry waste just being dumped into the river, which is why in Jacksonville, large government buildings are right on the river. We have the prison, we have the school board, we have the courthouse, because in the 70s, the river was so polluted, that land was not valuable. Now our biggest issue is non-point source pollution. So pollution coming from septic tanks, from our backyards, from industrial waste, not just one area that we can point out and fix, but from everywhere, a really systemic issue of pollution. There are about 1.2 million septic tanks in the whole state of Florida, and that's about 12% of the entire United States. In Volusia County alone, which is our spring country, which is where 30% of the river's flow comes from our springs, our freshwater springs that's pumping fresh water from our aquifer. Almost 100,000 septic tanks are in there. And the issue with septic tanks, it takes out the bacteria very effectively from our sewage and doesn't get that into the water, but it does not stop nutrients from getting into the water. So the issue with nutrients is an excess in nitrogen and phosphorus, and nutrients are naturally occurring in the wild. They're a good thing when it's not an excess. The issue, what happens is when there's an excess of pollutants and nutrients, and you get harmful algal blooms or green-blue algae. And has anyone ever seen an algal bloom in this area? Yeah. They happen. We're about to get into the season, which is why we're talking about it right now. Oh, do you? Yeah, so this is what our water looks like when there's an excess nutrients and when it's not clean. And sometimes these algal blooms can be harmful or release toxins. The main bacteria that we're talking about in the algae blooms here are microcystis that release microcystins, which are a group of toxins that can be very harmful for our drinking water. And then there's still a lot to be learned about how toxins and algae blooms actually affect us. There's a lot of studies, more research that needs to be done on the long-term effects of how it affects our nerves and neurotoxins and things like that. But algae, cyanobacteria, which is blue-green algae, is actually a very cool organism. It's one of the oldest known fossils. They're 400 million years old. They were the first organisms to create their own oxygen. So I can't tell you what time period, but back in the day, they oxygenated the earth and made the earth very rusty at one point. So they're very powerful. They can control their own buoyancy. And they're the largest grouping of bacteria in the world, which is why when blooms happen, they can control their buoyancy, and they're near the surface, and you can see them from space, some of these blooms. But they're very harmful when toxins are in them, which is very common. Things that we can do, well, before I get to that, I still want to talk about the bad news before I get to the good news. So right now, as I said, pollution in our river is our biggest issue. So we're having excess nutrients from our backyards and septic tanks, like we talked about, and using fertilizer all over our watershed. But in our headwaters, does anyone know where our river starts? It starts in Blue Cypress Lake in Indian River County, 310 miles south of where it exits up here in Mayport. And it starts from rainwater, just collected rainwater from beneath this lake that comes to the surface. So there's no springs or anything down here, but it's just rainwater that's happening there that's formed Blue Cypress Lake. Around Blue Cypress Lake, there are a lot of agricultural fields, and we are taking about 89,000 tons of Miami's sewage sludge or treated sludge and spraying and applying them on agricultural lands around Blue Cypress Lake. And you can see how that would be an issue. How would that be an issue? Applying a lot of fertilizer.
Excess. Right around water.
Exactly. So in rainstorms and when you're watering the ground, you have runoff into Blue Cypress Lake, which is a Class 1 lake, pristine waterway. They're seeing unprecedented levels of algae blooms, this green yuck down there that they've never seen before because we are taking South Florida sewage sludge. And South Florida has greater protections than we do here in the St. Johns River watershed. We just went to the State House in Tallahassee last month. We took a bus of citizens there to advocate for cleaner water. And there are 2 bills in the legislative session right now that would allow for us to have stricter regulations on applying the sewage sludge in our watershed. Another issue with the waste problem that we have, so when we have septic tanks, we're encouraging, it's hard for people to connect to sewer. It's expensive. There's no incentive to, because then you have to pay for water, and it's very expensive to phase out septic tanks in our watershed. But when you do connect people to sewer, that sewage goes into a wastewater treatment facility plant, and then they turn that into sewage sludge, which they then put back on the agricultural lands that they're applying on farms. So it's like this vicious cycle of our waste. And what Lisa Reineman, our St. John's Riverkeeper, believes is that we need a holistic approach to how we're dealing with our waste, because it is a huge issue.
Is it a product of growth, population growth? Mm-hmm. We have now gotten to an excess where we now are overpowering the natural resources we have available to us, or is it also policy?
It's both. So it's not a black and white issue. It's not a yes and no. It's really complex. So Florida is gaining about 800 to 1,000 people a day that are moving here because it's a wonderful place to live. And the reason people want to live here, one of the reasons, there's many, everyone's different, but it's because we have clean water. I mean, we are a state surrounded by water. And without that, then, why would most people want to live here? So it's an issue of population growth because there are so many people in Florida. There are so many septic tanks. We are using excess fertilizer. There's a lot of industry. So there's a lot of non-point source pollution that's happening. And there hasn't been a lot of policy in the St. Johns River watershed that has had protections against pollution. Like I just talked about, South Florida has more protections than we do, so us being a part of the process in the legislative session is huge. As an advocacy organizations, we are that middle ground between science and influencing public policy. My name is Kelly Thompson. I'm the Outreach Director with St. John's Riverkeeper, and I'm here at Earthworks Jax talking about ways that we can be river friendly as we're gearing up to prepare for the algae bloom season this summer. And we are partnering with them on a contest called our River Friendly Yard Award Contest, where they are giving away a $500 gift card to people who enter for the winner of this contest. And all you have to do is enter in, send pictures of your yard and ways that you're trying to make a difference by being river friendly.